Hi guys, okay, so we're back with some more content. It's paper 2 focus, so we are one exam down. From all accounts, it seems like it was okay. 2 exams to go. We've now got a transition from being paper 1 geographers, where we're primarily concerned with physical processes, physical factors, physical geography, and we're now transitioning more towards being human geographers in paper 2. It's probably the only A-level out there where you've got such a stark transition from one paper to the other. We've got science-based stuff, and then we're moving into kind of more social sciences-based stuff. So we've got to get refocused with our human content. So tonight I'm going to go through some migration content for you as requested. Okay, so the topic we're going to go through is the impact of globalization on migration. Now, it's a nice easy topic. It brings in a lot of the stuff from globalization that you've already studied. So once we can sort of break it down into that re-understanding of globalization and then linking it to the different elements of migration, we can start to develop that better understanding and bring in some of those core theories that we know are going to support our 20 markers. Okay, so we'll start off with, let's remind ourselves of what globalization is. Okay, so if you remember, globalization is that increasing interconnectedness between countries, and that's represented by the flows of globalization. And remember, these flows are commodities, people, information, and capital. So what we're trying to think about here is how are increases of these between countries influencing patterns of international migration. Now, from the perspective of migration, remember, key statistics that we need here. So 3 to 4% of the world are migrants, and that is in part due to globalization. So remember, there are 2 types of migrant. The 2 types of migrant, remember, are economic migrants, those looking to improve their standard of living, improve their quality of life. Others are asylum seekers and refugees. Now remember, key difference between these 2, asylum seekers, they are in the process of seeking asylum. They are in the process of trying to find a place where someone is going to legally grant them refugee status. A refugee is someone who has legally been granted the right to reside in a country, to flee persecution, to flee death. Okay, so the easiest ones to focus on, economic migrants. So let's now try and link globalization to the increase in economic migrants. Okay, so the way we do this is by considering our shrinking world technologies. Now remember that theory of a shrinking world. It's not that the world is shrinking. The world is not physically shrinking. What's happening is, with shrinking world technologies, we've developed that ability to travel faster. Because we can travel faster, that feeling is that the world is smaller. So our shrinking world technologies, that includes things like plane, jet aircraft, also includes things like boats as well, trains. It's all things that make movement between countries faster, easier. And not only this, they have become more affordable to more people. There's more competitiveness among the organizations that run these types of transport, brings the price down, so more people can access these technologies, which is why more and more people are becoming migrants worldwide. So one of the reasons we can link globalization to increasing economic migration is the fact that we've got these shrinking world technologies. Now these shrinking world technologies will then, key phrase here, absolutely crucial key phrase in the migration topic, increase confidence to migrate, and therefore increase levels of migration between countries. So that's a nice easy one to start with. Okay, next up, the other reason that we can link globalization to increasing economic migration is that because as a consequence of political globalization, which is essentially multilateral agreements between different nations, things like trade blocks. So political globalization is different nations working together. There's legal agreements between these nations, and trade blocks is one of those. One of the best trade blocks that you can talk about with respect to the movement of people is obviously the European Union. Now the European Union, this would be classed as a more integrated trade bloc. As well as being a common market, as well as being an economic union, they're also a social union as well. What they have allowed for is the free movement of people. Now, with the free movement of people, absolutely crucial phrase with the migration topic, we've decreased those barriers to migration. And when you decrease those barriers to migration, you increase the confidence to migrate. Now again, what becomes really important when we're writing a paragraph about political globalization and ways in which trade blocks can increase movement between countries of people, we can bring in more theories. Now remember, the theories, these are the things that are going to boost the level of your response in 20 markers. They're even going to boost the level of your response in things like 8 markers and 6 markers as well. So it's always worth trying to weave in our theories into any kind of paragraph that we're writing. So with political globalization and the EU, 2 theories I'm going to get you to weave in. So remember the last paragraph we were looking at, theory we spoke about was shrinking world theory. Shrinking world theory, very good theory to get in. What about this one here? We've got the periphery core theory. So in EU nations, we see there are periphery countries, and they will seek to move to core countries. Example of a periphery country. Example of a core country. Now, obviously we've got to be careful here, haven't we? So the Poland to UK example is one that we would say, historically, this has led to large levels of migration. But why was that? There was an agreement in 2004 that there would be a block of Eastern European nations that would be allowed to join the European Union. Now, within these Eastern European nations, what you had was high rates of unemployment. So in Poland, for example, in 2004, rates of unemployment were 19.5%. And there was 40% unemployment in the under 25s. Average monthly wage was around €500 per month. Not great. Whereas if we compare this to the UK, where low-skilled labour, the wages would be 4 to 5 times higher than that. We had low-skilled labour in Poland, the need for a low-skilled labour force in the UK, and so therefore we had the movement of people from Poland to the UK to improve their quality of life. It makes sense. UK needed the labour force, Poland had people who were unemployed that needed the work. We create a flow of economic migrants. Now that's the theory that you want to use. People are mainly going to move from periphery to core countries. So what's the theory that explains why we would allow that movement in the first place? It's this one. It's neoliberal economic theory. Neoliberal economic theory, this is the theory that promotes the free movement of things, the efficient movement of things. So essentially, if something is needed, a resource is needed for there to be economic growth to take place, it's the theory that states, why would you put things in the way of that movement? The resource could be a physical thing, the resource could be a person. So what neoliberal economic theory would promote is, why don't we just let people move freely from one place to the other? Fill a labour gap, the workforce is now more productive, contributing to GDP. Now, if you're struggling in the exam and you can't quite remember periphery core theory, there is always good old Lee's push-pull model. And this is exactly the same as periphery core theory. Only periphery core theory, you can mention specific countries that were classed as periphery and specific countries that would be mentioned as the core. Lee's push-pull, again, is just there's push factors from here, there's pull factors towards here. Your choice what you add in. Can add in all three, but remember, at the very least, add in one of these theories. And then finally, what could be a third way that we could talk about globalization increasing international migration? Now this is where you can be quite clever in the migration module. This is where you can utilize the fact that you've just been revising paper 1 probably for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and you can bring it into your human paper. Students that do this the best often end up performing the best in your human geography paper because you take that synoptic approach, taking your paper 1 knowledge and you're making it work in your human paper. Observe. What if we were to link the increasing flow of commodities to increasing migration and try and use a migrant type that we haven't used yet? Refugees. Now remember, container ship transport will lead to increased CO2 emissions. Container ship transport, increasing CO2 emissions. Increasing CO2 emissions, the increase in the enhanced greenhouse effect, global warming. So where am I going with this? What about that? So with global warming, what you get is increasing sea level rise, increasing storm intensity, and you're increasingly getting environmental refugees that are having to move from certain countries to other countries. Case in point would be somewhere like Tuvalu, a small island developing nation, are having to move to New Zealand gradually, slowly but surely, because of the loss of land in Tuvalu, having to increasingly move towards New Zealand, and they offer citizenship to 75 people per year. So not enormous amounts, but it is a way that globalization is leading to increased international migration. So let's apply this to a question. Those of you that know me as a teacher, you will know that I won't leave any bit of content without showing you how to link it to an exam style question. Okay, corker of a question, really good revision question. It's one of those revision questions where you can cover the entirety of inquiry question 1. So remember, what do we do before we even start the question? You read it once, you read it twice, on the third time you break it down, like this. So that right there was my 30 seconds. What I do is I underline the word evaluate. I remind myself of what's needed for an evaluate question. Amongst the obvious thing, range of knowledge, developed connections and relationship, AO1, facts and figures, places. Remember that we need balance and we need a justified judgment at the end. Remember, evaluate questions is like being in that courtroom. We are putting a view on trial. So in that first 30 seconds, you see what I did. Put a box around that. It's the view question. I'm going to go for agreeing with the view and disagreeing with the view. But remember, we want to use evaluative language. So we want to go agree to a certain extent and then we disagree. Now, remember, on the disagree side, you've got 2 options. For this essay, I would stick with this. In some essays, when you're disagreeing with the view, you can always put forward a viewpoint of a greater influence on rates of international migration might be going down that route there. What's the view that's on trial? The view that's on trial is this. There's the view that globalisation inevitably leads to increasing international migration. Now, on this side here, it's dead easy. We've just been through the content that we can use to answer this question. Got our 3 points, haven't we? Okay, so remember, this will get us to maybe 5 marks. 6 marks if the examiner is feeling generous. But we don't want that, do we? We want to be aiming higher. So what do we need? As per my previous video, we need some AO2. Now remember, where can our AO2 come from? Okay, so remember, we've got places, spatial scale, time scale, stakeholders, and uncertainties. So that's why we're hunting for our AO2. So remember, for all of those considerations that we just had there, thinking about, are there places where the rule doesn't apply? Are there spatial scales where the rule doesn't apply? Are there time scales over which the rule doesn't apply? What about stakeholders? Are we talking about all stakeholders here? What about future uncertainties? Is it certain that globalization will continue to inevitably lead to international migration? So let's think about some potential points that we could have on the counter side. Okay, so what about a places example? So we could potentially say that in some places there isn't that increased international migration as a consequence of globalization. Classic example would be, 2 examples spring to mind. When we're thinking about, is it inevitable that we'll get increased migration? Not always. Japan, closed door policy. So even when we could say there's an increasingly important role played by government policy on whether international migration will take place. More so than globalization and more so shrinking world tech. Just because we've got shrinking world tech doesn't mean that it's going to transport someone to somewhere that will allow them to enter their country and gain citizenship. North Korea, obviously, very heavy restrictions, very switched off from globalization. If you're switched off from globalization, then international migration is not going to really be something that you experience a great deal of. So we could then even bring in spatial scale to that point. So we're thinking at the global scale, if we just consider the trends, yes, it would seem that there has been an increase in migration, and it would seem at the global scale like the main reason behind that has been globalization. But in some localities, no, that doesn't make sense. At the local scale, we have to consider that there are individual anomalies where this rule doesn't apply. AO2. The other one as well could be people, stakeholders. There are certain people to which this doesn't apply. Yeah, so the benefits of globalization have not been evenly spread. So once again, in some local places, levels of income, levels of economic development have not permitted them to access the shrinking world technologies, or they are not within countries where there is the skill set that is required in other countries, so international migration has not taken place. Finally, let's go with uncertainties and future uncertainties. It's uncertain going forward, isn't it? Particularly in the current climate, whether globalization will continue to lead to increasing levels of migration. Because increasingly what we're seeing is the growth of nationalism, the tightening of borders between the US and Mexico, Brexit, the UK has withdrawn itself from the European Union. That is going to lead to a decrease in intra-EU migration. So remember, and as you can see, there's always going to be a counter argument. And then what we need is that final judgment, that final conclusion that makes the decision. Is it inevitable? And what you'd probably more than likely conclude is yes at the global scale, because an inevitability, this increase in migration flows, just from that alone, just from the shrinking world technology being able to facilitate increasing flows of people across borders, growing labour demands in certain countries, they can be filled by people in other countries. In addition to this, obviously, globalisation is an inextricable link with climate change. There are going to be more environmental refugees. However, at the local scale, there are things that would be anomalous examples where there are certain policies that restrict migrant flows, and going forward into the future we might not know whether it will increase in whether that trend will increase in those localities. Whereas at the global scale, yes, we agree with the view. At the local scale, there are still some anomalies where we would say we don't agree with the view. Job done. Okay, so hope you enjoyed that. There's probably going to be some more migration videos coming up, as well as some regen videos as well. Alright, so we've got a few more days left before that paper 2, so keep tuning into the YouTube videos. Any requests, please just put them in the comments and I'll try to get through as much as I can, but I can only produce these videos as, well, I've got a full-time job and I'm doing this in my spare time, so I'll do my very best with the videos. Those of you who want to know more information about the courses that I do, I'm going to put a link in the bio and you can see some information about the paper 2 stuff that I'm going to be running, including an all-day paper 2 session, and as well as that there's going to be a few other tutoring sessions too, group online tutoring sessions. Thanks very much and cheers for tuning in again.